This is the Comics Alternative, episode 266, reviews of Red Winter, Motherlands #1, and The Archies #4. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative. I'm Derek.
And I'm Gene, and we're two guys with PhDs talking about comics.
That's right. And on this week's episode, Gene and I are going to be looking at three very recent titles. We're going to begin with Anneli Furmark's Red Winter. After that, we're going to discuss Motherlands #1, written by Spurrier with art by Rachel Stott. And then we're going to wrap up with The Archies #4, written by Alex Segura and Matthew Rosenberg, with art by Joe Eisma. But before we get into that conversation, we want to let all of you know that this episode of the Comics Alternative is brought to you by the great folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There, you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts can be anywhere from 20 to 35% off of the cover price. And every single month, you're going to find some unbelievable, mind-blowing specials. Sometimes those specials could be as much as 45% off of the cover price. Sometimes 50% off of the cover. But every now and again, you can find discounts that are even more impressive than that.
And that's right. And this is probably one of the last few days that you might even be able to order the January bundles. But we've got a lot of bundles at DCB Service. If you go down to the bottom and you just click on bundles, and up you get the beautiful list of things that are almost all at 50% off, including a Valiant bundle, a Marvel Legacy bundle, DC Universe Rebirth bundles of aplenty. There's four of those. Young Animal bundle, and again, I like the Young Animal titles generally a lot, so that's a lot of fun. And those are all 50% off, and there's a DC Universe Variant Edition bundle for only 45% off. Only 45% off. But still, that's a pretty good discount.
It is, and you'll find great discounts like that every single month, not only the tail end of January, but into February and the rest of the year. So make sure you go to dcbservice.com because they will take care of all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your titles there, please be sure to send them an email and tell them that the two guys with PhDs sent you.
Darn straight.
Well, Gene, before we get into a discussion of this week's books, I want to say a little something about listener response. We say all the time on the Comics Alternative that we really do appreciate our listeners getting in touch with us through a variety of different means. It could be email, it could be social media, like Facebook or Twitter, or basically, any way that they can respond and let us know what they like about the show, what they appreciated, any recommendations we made that really resonates with them, or it could be something that they disagree with, right? Or we did something or missed out on something. So yeah, we'll take, the good as well as the more critical. And so we always appreciate responses like that. Every now and again, though, we get a special kind of response. And what I mean by that is we get a response from one of the creators whose work we discuss on the show. And after you and I finished recording last week's episode, in fact, this is definitely within an hour of us wrapping up and recording, I saw that we got a voice message via SpeakPipe from Emil Ferris. And that's right. Now, you know Emil Ferris. You've even had the pleasure of meeting her. I haven't met her yet. I hope to someday very soon, like this year. But for our listeners who are scratching their heads going, now, wait a minute, where have I heard that name before? Well, she is the creative mind behind My Favorite Thing is Monsters. And the first volume of that came out last year. And not only was it one of my and Paul's favorites of 2017, and that episode went up last week, but it's on a top of many people's lists from last year's best comics. Now, the second volume of My Favorite Thing is Monsters is coming out, I think, in either late summer or the fall of this year. But what really impressed me was the fact that Emil took the time to call us on our SpeakPipe account and leave us a message about how much she appreciated my and Paul's discussing her book as one of our favorites of last year.
That is very cool. And Emil's she's a great communicator in all kinds of ways, and this is just one more example of that. But yeah, she's local. I'm honored to say that she's actually she's practically a neighbor of mine. One of the benefits of living in the greater Chicago area is that there's lots of cool people who live around here, and Emil is one of the coolest. And again, that book, if I'd have been on that show, that would have been my number one pick for last year as well, most definitely. As soon as I read it, I was like, yeah, I don't think there's anything that's going to top this. And I was proven right. I read a lot of good stuff last year, but My Favorite Thing was Monsters was definitely my number one for last year also. Yeah.
Well, one of the things we do on our end of the year show, we try not to rank them, from 10 to 1. We just choose what each of us considers our favorite 10.
Right.
Although when it comes right down to it, usually the title that either me or Andy or, this past year, me and Paul, we wait until the very end to reveal to the other is our number one, even though we don't call it our number one. And for both of us, it was My Favorite Thing is Monsters. So let's go ahead and share Emil's message with the rest of our audience.
Cool.
Hi guys, this is Emil Ferris, and I just wanted to say thank you so very much for your amazing inclusion of my book and choice of it, and for putting it among so many things I admire so much. And you guys are the best, and monsters love you. So looking forward to meeting you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you again, Emil, for that message. We really appreciate the feedback, and even more importantly, thank you very much for My Favorite Thing is Monsters.
Yeah, thanks so much, Emil. That was great. Thanks for reaching out to the podcast as well. That's super good.
Okay, Gene, let's get into this week's discussion, and we're going to begin with a brand new graphic novel, if we want to call it that, from Anneli Furmark, and this is called Red Winter. This was published by Drawn and Quarterly last week. It was released on January 23rd. And had you heard of Anneli Furmark before this book?
I'd probably run across the name just because this was an Angoulême official selection. So I tried to keep up with that stuff, but I'd never actually seen this book or really known her work at all. I just heard the name, but I knew nothing about it.
Yeah, you mentioned that she's been recognized by the Angoulême Comics Festival, but she's also won the Swedish Comics Association's Unden Prize, and I do not know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. She is Swedish, and this is, I think, her first book translated into English. I would assume we can expect other of her works to be translated into English and then published through Drawn and Quarterly. I learned after reading Red Winter, which I really liked, that this is part of a trilogy of books. And it may even be called the Red Winter Trilogy. Maybe I'm wrong there, but it's actually, from what I understand, the third in the trilogy. The first one is titled Fiskarna i Havet, which translates into The Fishes in the Sea. And then the second volume in the trilogy is Jordan's Medelpunkt, which in English is The Center of the Earth. And by the way, if we have any Swedish listeners out there or listeners who are proficient in Swedish, please excuse my sloppy pronunciation of those titles.
Sorry, Frederick Stromberg. It is not one of the languages that we hold.
That's right. And in fact, I think it's through Frederick that I learned partly about this being part of a trilogy. And I know we've had him on the show before, you and I. Mm-hmm. What did you think of this book?
I loved it. Mm-hmm. I knew very little of when I say very little, I mean pretty much zero of the political aspects of Sweden in the 1970s. But you get enough... I'm sure it probably resonates a lot more over there, but there's still plenty enough in the book to let you know kind of what the stakes are involved on kind of a micro and a macro level for this, and it's also physically beautiful as well. The kind of a
is it like a watercolor feel?
Yeah. It's very very watercolory and kind of like a lot of blues and oranges, and it's just really really beautiful to look at. And the way the book is sort of set up, every chapter focuses on one character's perspective, or maybe two characters, as you work your way through. And it kind of gives you a broader view of what's at stake over the course of the narrative.
Right. Now, I'm glad that you mentioned the temporal setting for Red Winter, which is the late 1970s, because that's important. I think if someone goes into Red Winter without understanding that this takes place during that time period, they may wonder how antiquated this narrative is. And what I mean by that is much of what goes on in this book, in fact, a key component to the story world is the presence of the Communist Party, and then some of the tensions within the Swedish Communist Party, and then other parties and political factions as well. And if you didn't know that this takes place in the late 1970s, that would seem to be a little out of place with where we are today. Let's say, post 1989, with the fall of the Berlin Wall. But if you do understand that this takes place at a particular place in time, then I think it does resonate quite well. And so basically what you have here is a relationship narrative, right? And the two main people involved is a wife and mother by the name of Siv, and then her quite a bit younger lover, Ulrich. And Ulrich is a member of the Communist Party. Siv is married to a worker, a laborer named Borge, and he is, I think, like Siv, right, a social democrat. And Ulrich, or at least seem to have sympathies toward the social democrats. And that's one of the things that Ulrich mentions every now and again when he's with Siv, is that, she may be a little to the right of him, but he hopes to bring her over. And so in many ways, Ulrich has definitely swallowed the party line. And I don't want to give anything away about what happens toward the end of this narrative. No spoilers, but let's just say that some of his expectations and even his dedication is called into question as the story progresses, and this has everything to do with his relationship with Siv. And, as you pointed out, all of the chapters are centered around, maybe even focalized through one, sometimes maybe two characters. So the very first chapter is titled Siv. The second one is Marita, which is Siv's daughter. And then I think the chapter after that is Ulrich. And then there are other chapters that kind of focus on other characters as well. Other children of Siv and Borges, for instance, Peter becomes an important character, the brother of Marita. And then a colleague of Ulrich's, Rolf, also has a chapter that centers on him, is quite significant. So, it does deal with I guess you could call it a dated political dynamic, but one I think that makes for really good storytelling.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And like you said, the kind of communist social democrat tension between the two characters is underlaid starting on page 2 already, or page 2 or 4, something like that. It happens really soon, and you at least as a reader, I'm wondering, kind of there's the idea that sort of love conquers all, love transcends all, but these two people have very, very little in common.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow they found love, and that's great. But because they have so little in common, and that's brought up again and again, and every time that they meet, or every time that we get into their minds, you wonder, how could this possibly last? Because there are so many impediments to a relationship like this working. Number one, again, Siv is married with a family, and Ulrich is clearly part of something larger, which he is hesitant to tell Siv about also. Whenever she asks for anything specific, he says, I can't talk about that. I can't talk about that. So there's always, there's a level of secrets all the way through.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody is kind of harboring their own secrets. And again, that's kind of like, that might sound trite, but it really works in this narrative as well, because the secrets always have consequences.
Mm-hmm.
Every time somebody tries to hide something, if you have to hide it, there's probably a reason why it shouldn't be there in the first place. It's kind of what I took out of this book.
Yeah, and especially as that concept applies to two of the main characters, Siv and Ehrlich, because each of them has certain secrets that they need to hide, but that secret ends up biting them in the rear toward the end. And again, not wanting to give anything away, about what happens. For Siv, obviously, it is the secret of this affair that's going on. For Ulrich, it's also the affair, but it's from a different perspective, right? So it's not because of what it does with any kind of marriage or romantic relationships he has, but it's his relationship with the party.
Right, there's personal and political consequences.
Exactly. And so I think that's where the secrets come in. But even with the minor characters, I think that there are things that go on, secrets that occur maybe on a much less grand scale, that also end up having consequences for those characters as well. And I'm thinking in particular of the two main children of Siv and Borges, and that is Marita and then Peter. They have, 3 or 4 kids? I can't remember.
I think there's 3.
Okay, the 3, yeah. There's another brother. I can't remember his name. We do see him, but he doesn't have as major a role, let's say, as Peter or Marita do. But even Rolf, right? And Rolf is, I guess, what is he, the head of the local party, or the chairman of the local party, the branch of the party?
Sure. Yeah, I can't remember if we get an actual title for him or not.
But it's something like that. And he is also, it's his house that Ehrlich is living in with Rolf and his girlfriend. I don't know if he's married. But, and so that's kind of a strange situation as well. But, Rolf, I guess, not Ralph, has his own things going on and does things in certain ways that are a little secretive that have consequences, as we find out toward the end of the book.
Right, yeah. And I think it's even kind of telegraphed the first time we meet him, actually, on page 44, when Ralph and his friend, I'm blanking on his name.
Oh, the guy who's in the cafe with Ulrich?
Right. Yeah, they're in the cafe. Yeah, sorry. When Ulrich and I'm not seeing his name.
Well, it's the only time we see him, so you can just call him the friend or the colleague.
The friend.
Yeah.
The friend with the slight mustache.
Right.
But when Ralph comes in, his first words are "Hello, comrades," and they go, "Hi, Ralph. Hi, Ralph." No. You answer, "Hello, comrade," and so they both go, "Hello, comrade," and then Ralph says, "Ha! Can't you tell I'm joking?" And that kind of sets off like, he comes off as officious, but he's not really. But actually, he really is. I kind of think that joking wasn't much of a joke. He really does expect things to work in a certain order.
Right.
I think he takes the party a lot more seriously than Ulrich does. Even though Ulrich is devoted to it, he's not 100. His beliefs are there, but I think his person isn't entirely there.
Yeah, and in fact, Rolf functions in many ways as almost a stereotypical party flunky, right? Or a devotee, someone who has most certainly drank the Kool-Aid and is very proper about the way that things run, what should be done, the relationship among various comrades and whatnot.
Right, yeah, and he's clearly the linchpin around how the party is operating, at least in this town. And again, as we find out later, that we've got other people involved as well, and there are decisions by committee. But it kind of feels like even if the decisions by committee, he's pretty much some committee members are more equal than others.
Right. With some of the other minor characters, and I'm focusing in particular on Marita, because I think that she comes out more in the story than her brother Peter, although we do get at one point about midway through to see quite a bit about what's going on with Peter and his world. But with Marita, she is a child who is somewhat aware of what's going on with her parents. She can sense that something is a tad off kilter, but she really doesn't know much about the details, if anything, really about the details, and why there seems to be some kind of, barrier between Civ and her and Maria's father, Borge. Borge or Borge, I can't remember. It's Borge. Is it Borge?
I would want to say Borge, but I don't really know.
Yeah, Borge sounds Spanish, but and so the chapters where we get her as a focus, and I think there are about 3 of them where she becomes a main player in what's going on, comes across as quite a bit of an innocent, right? And in fact, the book, and this is not a spoiler in any way, ends with her and her friend Kiki, I think is her name, or as she is called, and it has a rather innocent ending. And the way that I read Marita and her innocence is as a contrast to what's going on between Civ, Ulrich, Borge, and even Ralph and the party, right? Because with that, there's this lack of innocence. And so I think that the innocence of Marita functions almost as a foil, in a way, as a character would, to what's going on with the adults.
Yeah, possibly. I'm not sure she's entirely innocent, though. I mean, she does find the diary early on. She knows what's going on, but it's kind of bigger than she's able to kind of cope with.
Or will admit to, right.
But hints are dropped along the way that she's... The one important thing is when she and Civ are out walking, and they actually meet up with Ulrich. Mm-hmm. And there's that... Civ just kind of mentioned that he's a friend, and she starts to introduce her daughter to Ulrich, and he says, nice to meet you, Marita, before her name has been mentioned by Civ. And at the very end of that scene, because this is an Ulrich chapter, so as after Ulrich Civ and Marita leave, we see a panel that's focused on Ulrich, but in the background we can see Marita saying, "How did he know my name?"
Right.
to her mom, and we don't get an answer to that question. So that, to me, that kind of sets up this weird tension. And again, it's because the chapter's focalized through Ulrich that we know this thing happened, but we don't really know what happened beyond that. So Marita, by asking that question, that's got to send a signal to her mom that that Marita might know something, but we don't really see how that dynamic plays out. We see it played out more with the way that Marita interacts with her friend mostly.
Yeah,
but we don't get her obsessing a lot. But she kind of does things for herself, and when she's alone, she's very, very quiet.
That's a good point. And I take what you say about her innocence or the lack thereof, or I guess maybe more tempered innocence would be a better way of putting it, to heart. That does make sense. I still would call her an innocent, but maybe a better way of putting it is that it is a willed innocence, right? So she may have knowledge of certain things, not completely, but of a few things, and may sense that things are a little askew with her family, things between her mother, father, and maybe the mother's lover, Ulrich. but she doesn't allow herself to admit that. And in that way, she's very much like some of the other characters in this book, including the adults. So, for instance, I mean, one of the questions I have after reading this is, how much did Bourget know about what Siv was up to? I got the sense that he had to have known something, but again, it's kind of a willed innocence, right? He's not admitting this to himself. And in many ways, there's something similar going on with Ulrich and even Rolf to a certain degree, right? Knowing that something's up, but not admitting it or admitting it completely, at least at first. I think with Ralph, it's a little bit different situation than some of the other characters. But that gets back to a major theme that you pointed out, and that is the keeping of secrets. And so it's not just keeping certain things from others; it's keeping things from yourself as well.
I think so, definitely. There's hints that Bourget might know something, and turns out that Ulrich and Bourget work together. So that's one level that we don't actually see that interaction at all. But this man is working with his lover's husband every day, and that's got to be a strange thing. And that would be an interesting tension to get explored. And it's interesting that it's not explored at all, really.
Yeah.
We get mentions of that. One thing that I thought was interesting was that we get one very intimate scene between Siv and Marita, and they can't help but devolve into a political discussion, especially because there's a poster of...
you mean Siv and Ulrich.
So Siv and Ulrich, right, sorry. Siv and Ulrich, because there's a poster of Karl Marx staring down at them while they're in bed. And she lamented, she said, I thought that what we had stood outside of politics. But in this book and in this world, it's impossible to stand outside of politics. No matter how hard you try, the politics are always creeping in.
Right. And the great irony of that scene is that Ulrich tells Siv in so many words, nothing's outside of politics. However, his view of their relationship, and again, without giving anything away that happens toward the end of this narrative, is innocent in its own way because he sees it as outside of the politics. Mm-hmm. So
it's not related. It's something separate. But,
exactly. Yeah. And that irony really does come home, and you realize that as you get toward the end of this book. But when you see around the middle this relationship, and this is with them in bed together, and this is in the chapter titled Siv and Ulrich. When he says, nothing stands outside politics. Yeah, you say that now, but
you don't always act that way.
Exactly. I thought that this was an outstanding story, and I'm really wondering what takes place in the earlier two books in this trilogy, The Fishes in the Sea and The Center of the Earth, which leads me to wonder why Drawn in Quarterly, and I guess along with Anneli Furmark, decided to publish this one first.
Well, that's I suppose that's really, really hard to say. But I mean, this is a narrative that clearly stands on its own. And it depends on what kind of a trilogy it might be. It might be a thematic trilogy rather than seeing these same characters earlier on as well. It may just be like part of this time period or something like that. But I'm happy we have this, and I hope that we get a lot more. And it's a beautiful book, and they've clearly put a lot of work into the book as well. It's a hefty, substantial tome. The production values, everything is just beautiful in this book.
Yeah, you're right. Great art, a compelling story. And one of the things I especially like about this book, and again, I'm not giving anything away about the ending, but I have referenced it a little while ago, and that is it ends with Marita, right? And arguably, she is not one of the major figures involved. I mean, obviously, she's affected by everything that happens here. But we find out what happens with Siv and Bourget, especially her parents, through her and through her conversation with her friend Kiki. We don't see it directly, right? So I like that because it does leave open the possibility that we don't know what ultimately happened with Siv and in the relationship between Siv and Bourget. because we get it secondhand, if not third hand, because this is a young person who's trying to make sense of things. And also it's a young girl telling her friend what's happening, right? So, I mean, how disclosive does she want to be with her friend? Does she want to be completely honest? Might she be masking something? We don't know. And as I've said many times on this podcast, I prefer narratives that have ambiguous endings. And I think this definitely functions in that way.
Yeah, it's clear that she doesn't really want to talk about it when her friend mentions the situation. But then they go outside, and what I like is that we start off with a meditation on snow and how it covers things, and at the very end, there's a puddle. The snow is melting, and when the waters recede, who knows what you're going to find? And the melting snow is kind of gives them like there are some small consequences for that. My mom is going to be mad. I think mine is going to be too, because we got our boots wet. But as things get revealed, there are consequences, and I thought that was a nice thematic way to kind of tie the book together.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you pointed that out, because that underscores something else about Red Winter that I really appreciated. I think the first time you read it, you may think that this is a rather simple story that's being told, that not very complex things are going on, that a lot, maybe the art as well seems to be rather simple and elementary. But I think that's deceptive, that there's much more going on. The closer you read, the more you read it, and the deeper you dig into what's going on. And I think that your visual theme or conceptual theme of, the snow and the melting snow and getting wet and there being consequences is all a part of that, right? So I think you can read that last chapter just as you can read the entire book and think, okay, this is a fairly simple, straightforward story. It's like, well, perhaps, but, you're not looking close enough. There's much more going on.
Yeah, I guess I didn't see it as that simple even on the first go-round. I mean, the through line is pretty simple, but I just thought it was... It's just so well done where we get into the psychology of some of these characters. I mean, some of it is a little shallower than others, but it's not just the story of star-crossed lovers. It's not just the political backdrop. There's a lot of just interpersonal stuff besides just the two lovers that really made it interesting for me. There's a lot of character interplay that works really well. And again, and I think the art really does hit that point really strongly as well. There's a lot of good acting, even if, like you said, the art might be somewhat simple. It's a little it's almost Linda Barry-ish in a weird way. Not exactly. It's almost like Linda Barry crossed with Jules Pfeiffer at this point for me. But it's a little simple. It's a little scratchy, but it's also really, really expressive.
Right, I agree. Well, Gene, you want to move on to the second title that we're going to be looking at this week?
Yeah, and that is Motherlands, a new series from Vertigo.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't read a new Vertigo book in a long time. So again, my Vertigo is like Sebastian O. I go back to the very beginnings of Vertigo, so this is in a whole different universe conceptually than I was used to in the early days. And this is a weird kind of it's not exactly time travel, it's dimension hopping bounty hunters, I guess is
yeah.
One way to put that.
Exactly, yeah. I think that's a great way of describing the conceit here. And, I'm like you, maybe not to the same degree, in that it's been a little while since I've read a new Vertigo title. And by that, a little while, I mean more than, let's say, 4 or 5 months. And one of the things I've let go is keeping up with Vertigo stuff, because I'm not exactly sure where Vertigo is going now, especially in the, 2 or 3 years after Karen Berger left. And in fact, if our listeners haven't heard it, they should listen to my and Paul's interview with Karen Berger, primarily about the new Berger book imprint over at Dark Horse. But we also talked about her time at Vertigo for a while, so that was interesting. But you're right. I mean, when Vertigo first got its start, it wasn't as, I guess, sci-fi-ish as this. I mean, obviously we had things like Swamp Thing was taken into the new Vertigo, just as Hellblazer was taken into the new Vertigo. So it definitely had a supernatural feel to it. But I read this first issue of Motherlands, and by the way, this is written by Cy Spurrier with art by Rachel Stott, as having very much a Vertigo feel, because Vertigo has evolved quite a bit since the 1990s, and it's not just the more, I don't know, supernatural horror kind of things, because they also have done a lot of fantasy and science fiction over the past couple of decades. And so this definitely fits within that tone. And in that way, it just made sense that this would be a Vertigo book.
Yeah, and also the almost comical overuse of the F word.
Yeah, I mean, in places, yeah.
It's like, I understand you're setting a tone and stuff like that, but just because you can, I got a little, I don't think I'm a prude, but man, do we need that much of it?
Did that bother you?
I think the story stands without it being. It felt a little gratuitous, because I think the kind of heightened anger and emotion and things like that it's getting there is like, I know some people talk about that, but it just felt like a little much to me.
Yeah. Okay.
But again, the story. To be fair, the story itself is a little much, overtly on purpose. I mean, this is the big concepts and. Big over-the-top action, big over-the-top characterization all the way through. So in that sense, I understand it. It just, I don't, again, old prude.
Yeah.
Not meaning to be.
Well, this is the first of what I think is a 6-issue miniseries. And in this first issue, I think we start off with a conceptual premise here, right? Because the first few pages takes place in the past with our main character, Tabitha Tubach, as a young girl in school, and she's called to the principal's office, and there we find Tabitha's mother, who is really angry, and she's the one who's doing a lot of the cussing.
Right.
And we find out that it's not anything that Tabitha has done that causes the mother to get so upset, and why the school called in the mother, but it's what Tabitha's brother, Bubbsa, is his name, has done. But we don't see him. I mean, there's an image of him at the very end. We don't want to give anything away, though, about what happens at the end of this first issue. But other than that, he's completely absent from this first issue. But in the initial pages, I think in the midst of her studies, we do get a bit of exposition, right? That what kind of world do we have here? And so we hear from this kind of robotic technology, hoverbots or whatever you want to call them, that they're in a world now where the, different dimensional strings, as they're called, have been discovered. And these various strings it's kind of like a multiverse, right? Mm-hmm, right. Different possible worlds. And when you said that this is kind of a dimension hopping narrative, we literally have someone hopping through dimensions in the middle of this first issue when Tabitha, who is a bounty hunter, is chasing, what is this guy's name? Borad Clancis Het. Who seems like kind of a nasty character, at least visually, but in what he says and in his interactions with Tabitha Tubach, doesn't seem to be that nasty of a character. In fact, he seems to have, to at least a certain degree, a sense of humor. But I mean, they literally do hop through different dimensions, and that's one of the fun things about this first issue that I enjoyed. Another thing that we learn is that, and this is where Tabitha and Bubba's mother comes into play. There is in this world a media phenomena called huntertainment. and this is something like the kind of reality, quote unquote, TV shows that we got several years ago with things like Dog the Bounty Hunter, where bounty hunting can be entertainment, when you have a camera along. And that's what Tabitha's mother used to do. And in fact, she was a quite famous bounty hunter named Scarlet Sylph. And I would even say a somewhat notorious one because let's just say she was sexually charged.
Yes, she did not stop using sex as a weapon. She started using sex as a weapon, basically. And again for the entertainment value, I'm guessing again it's kind of like it's very timely in that sense. Everything's about the ratings.
Yeah, exactly. Now,
because it's all being broadcast.
Right. And you were saying something earlier about the gratuitous fucks. There's also a scene around the middle of this first issue where we have a gratuitous full frontal shot of the Scarlet Sylph.
Right. Yeah. Kind of saying just how supposedly beautiful and transgressive she was, and again, the bounty the guy that Tabitha is chasing is always throwing her mother's past and her mother's tactics back at her because Tabitha is anything but that. She's covered in huge armor and padding and stuff like that. She's out for business, and for her, everything is. I think she says everything is just a transaction.
Right.
This is not about entertainment. This is about capturing criminals. This is not about anything other than that. And she's pure business, where her mother was pure flash, pure entertainment in all kinds of ways.
Yeah, and there is in this first issue a hint that there's some kind of tension between Tabitha and her mother, because it seems as if Tabitha is trying to live down what her mother used to do, and or she's bothered. I mean, we don't know exactly what's going on, but this comes out in that scene where, you know, the bounty that Tabitha's after, the Borad Clancis Het, is making references to Tabitha's mother, and Tabitha doesn't like it. And then we see Tabitha visiting her mother, who is, of course, much older, in a kind of home toward the end of this first issue. And, you know, in that way, it reminded me of The Watchmen and Silk Spectre and her relationship with her mother.
Yeah, there's definitely a little hint of that. I hadn't thought of that exactly, but yeah, I think there's definitely some resonances of that there, sort of living up to the mother's reputation, but taking the same job in a similar but different sort of direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know, I'm just assuming that we'll learn quite a bit more in the next issue or two of Motherlands, because it's only a 6-issue miniseries, so we better find out about this relationship between mother and daughter pretty darn soon.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. And one thing that I thought was one really nice little subtle touch on that very first page, it's the flashback to 30 years ago where Tabitha's in the classroom. Mm-hmm. I like the fact that she's got this, she's got a Band-Aid on her left cheek. And
that's right.
Which is just kind of strange. And then when you jump a few pages ahead, the first time we see a full shot of her face in the future, she's got a little scar in that same place. So there's something from her childhood has remained. I think it's more than just that scar.
Very good. I had not noticed that mark on the left side of her face on, I don't know, I guess it's around page 5 or 6, once we jump 30 years into the future, or into the present, I guess, from that flashback. Yeah. And so there's something about that, let's say the Band-Aid and then the scar, that may tell us a little bit about this relationship between mother and daughter.
I think she's been carrying some. I think it's pretty clear she's been carrying several forms of scars from her childhood throughout her entire life. Because she's got to be in her mid to late 30s at this point. Because,
and not just emotional scars.
Right.
Yeah.
One thing that I did like also for the dimension hopping aspect of it is we get some interesting visual stuff when people are going through, and this is like I think it's story pages 5 and 6. Where Tabitha is chasing Borad for the first time, sort of, and as he starts flipping through the different strings, and it's this we've got there's kind of the visual thing of like these kind of cubes, almost like kind of like a crystalline thing that kind of is the symbol for the entering through the dimensions, but at the same time, the panel borders tend to get these little carrots in them and stuff like that, moving you through, showing you just kind of visually how things are happening. And also, what I really like is the word balloons.
Yes, I was going to comment on that. Yeah,
because I'm all about the word balloons and the lettering. But as people are going through, because people are entering dimensions and leaving directions, like the top third or the bottom third of a word balloon will be cut off kind of on a diagonal, which means that like they're kind of appearing in this dimension, and it's not even instantaneous, or because like it's portions of words and portions of sentences are there and they're not there at the same time, sort of. So it's kind of visually makes me understand what this process is like, different than just appearing and disappearing. It's like you're kind of fading through, sort of.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned the way that the visuals were handled and how Rachel Stott represented this kind of string hopping or dimension hopping, primarily through the cut off or the truncated word balloons. I really did like that. I thought that was a nice touch. Nothing revolutionary, but I think quite effective.
Yeah. It's not the. Yeah, you're right. It's not revolutionary, but it is really effective, and it's something that I haven't seen done quite that way before. Mm-hmm. And again, the art itself in the book is very beautiful. It's a little Frank Quitely. It's pretty clear, but again, I like the art a lot. There's a lot of interesting panel layouts and page designs and things like that as well.
Yeah, I agree. And another thing I wanted to mention about this first issue, you mentioned the pragmatic side of Tabitha, that what she does is just for a buck. She pays the rent, doesn't really go for the glory like her mother did, right? With all of the attention she got. Another thing I sensed in this first issue, and it doesn't come out clearly, but I think that we can intuit this, is that to some degree she's someone who is a bit of unlucky character. Maybe something, not to the degree of being a schlemazel, let's say, but she's someone who doesn't get all the breaks that she may want. And we see this when she brings in her bounty, the Borad Clancis Het, into, I guess, the main station, right? It's kind of like a police station, but it's not the police. It doesn't seem to be this way. And this is on string 0, right? So this, I guess, is like, Earth 1, so to speak, right. What DC would call. And Borad is trying to tell her that he has information. That, if he would just either let her go or not treat him the way that she is, he will tell her something that would, she would love to know. And she doesn't believe him. She hands him over, and lo and behold, he actually did know some important information that she's kind of almost hating herself after learning. She didn't cash in, so to speak, for that. But you do get a sense that she's someone who is effective, but maybe not the luckiest person in her world.
Yeah, right. And she's treating it as just a job and trying to not be doing all the extraneous stuff like her mom. But at the same time, she missed that big thing there as well. So she thinks she's doing a great job, but maybe she's not paying attention to all the right things necessarily. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely an interesting premise.
Right. And getting back to Rachel Stott's art, I did very much appreciate the way toward the end of this first issue that she represented the older mother. When she does reside now in what could be considered, an old folks home or a long-term care facility, which it's interestingly enough is right across. Yeah, it's right across from a graveyard. Which the mother comments on. But yeah, she is shown as inside of some kind of craft. It's almost like a wheelchair. In other words, around her torso, where her lower body half, I guess her legs, maybe a little above that, would begin, she's in some kind of device that moves. It looks like it has legs, mechanical legs of some sort. She's obviously older. Her hairstyle, you can tell she still has a sense of sexuality and style to some degree. She's smoking a cigarette in a holder. She thinks herself probably a little more alluring than she actually is. And I think that all of these touches give the mother, who used to be Scarlet Sylph, I don't know, this touch that is intriguing. So I want to learn more about her in the relationship with Tabitha.
Yeah, it looks like clearly she probably was forced to enter a career probably in maybe more than one different way. She's basically like Korvac, except if Korvac had chicken walker legs from Star Trek. So I'm putting out all the nerd cards right there.
Yeah,
she's Korvac on a chicken walker.
Okay, you want to look at the final issue that we're going to be discussing this week?
Yes.
And
I was kind of surprised when you mentioned this first because it's a number 4 issue, and you said we normally tend to do number 1s.
Exactly, and usually when we look at single issues on the Comics Alternative, our weekly review shows, we'll look at the first issue of a new series, or maybe the first 2. It's a rarity, but sometimes the first 3 issues of a new series. But here we're discussing the Archies, number 4, written by Alex Segura and Matthew Rosenberg, with art by Dallas native Joe Eisma. This came out, I think, on January 17th. It's issue number 4, but there's a reason why we're discussing the 4th issue of this series and not, let's say, doing number 1 a few months ago. And that is because of the presence of celebrities that Gene, both you and I are big fans of, the Monkees.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So it looks like I haven't read any issues of the Archies before this, but this is the Archies as in the band the Archies. And they're on a nationwide tour, it looks like. It looks like issue 3 took place in Boston, and in issue 4 they're in Sweet Home Chicago. So that was another selling point for me right away.
Yeah. And now for our younger listeners who may not be, hip to the Archies, the musical band, back in the 1960s, Archie and the crew, Betty, Veronica, Jughead, Reggie, those guys, they had a band called the Archies. They even had their own television cartoon called the Archies. I used to watch it all the time. And even more important, they produced music, a big hit. I think it was the number 1 song for that year, which is 1969? No, it wasn't that early.
Oh, was it?
Sugar. And so, younger people who really don't know much about the history of Archie and Archie comics and cartoons and whatnot.
You're right. Yep.
Yeah. They may think, oh, well, they had their own band. Oh, yeah. And I mean, this is one of those bubblegum pop songs that was created almost out of nowhere, kind of manufactured. And it was a Don Kirshner production, which actually the Monkees used to be. Before they got a little revolutionary and bucked the Kirshner system.
Right.
And apparently, now, from what I gather, and I have not read the first 3 issues of this series, The Archies, but from the art and where things are going here, I guess that this is part of what's been going on with Archie, the Archie franchise over the past few years, and that is trying to bring it to kind of a new generation. I know when we had a new Archie comic a couple of years ago, the one that Mark Waid wrote and Fiona Staples illustrated, it was the same Archie and the gang, but different in various ways. But at the same time, we had the old Archie that continued, right, in other titles. I think that the Archies, this series that began several months ago, is part of this initiative, right? Because we have a new Archie comic, we had a new Jughead comic, we had a new Betty and Veronica comic, and now we get kind of a new The Archies comic. And Joe Eisma, who's done other work for Archie, and in fact, this new series, Archie, a couple of years ago, is the illustrator here. I like what Eisma does in terms of going back and forth between what I guess we could call a more realistic style and a more
contemporary. It's a little right. It's a little more contemporary, a little more manga-ish, a little more harsh. It's not the old Archie house style that no matter who was drawing it, you could tell like the round noses and stuff.
Right,
like
exactly.
That. It's not that at all.
Which is the kind of Archie that Fiona Staples was illustrating,
exactly.
In that initial series a couple years ago. But yet in this issue, when something happens to Archie, when he's hit in the head during a gig and apparently falls unconscious, the art reverts back to this kind of older, more rounded, cartoony style. And this is where the Archies meet the monkeys.
Of course, because why wouldn't they?
Exactly. Now, I wasn't aware of this when we decided to discuss issue number 4 of the Archies, but apparently this is just one of a series of issues of this title where actual musical bands are going to be guests. And I think this may have started, and listeners can correct me if I'm wrong, with issue number 3, when the Archies met Churches. And it's a Scottish band. I'm not familiar with them, but I had to look them up. Issue number 4 is the Monkees. Next month in issue number 5, the Archies are going to meet Tegan and Sarah. And then, and this is another blast from our past, Gene, in issue number 6, the Archies apparently are going to meet Blondie.
Oh, damn, I have to buy that one.
But, I think, okay, Blondie makes sense to me. And these more contemporary band, Churches and Tegan and Sarah, they make sense. I guess to a certain degree, the Monkees make sense, especially with the Don Kirshner link between the two, the Monkees and the Archies, historically speaking. On the other hand, I couldn't help but think that there's something sad about this issue because Davy Jones has died. What did you think?
Yeah, well, it didn't strike me as well that way, just because it is it's clearly a fantasy sort of flashback thing. It's not supposed to be taking place today at all.
I mean, I know, but still,
But
still, I mean, readers will know that, right? I mean, they'll take, like I did, and say, yes, this is a fantasy, and in fact, this even takes place inside of Archie's head once he's knocked unconscious. However, as much as I love the Monkees, I couldn't help, because Davy Jones is a central part of this story, couldn't help but think, oh, it's sad. Davy's dead.
That is there. There's no question about that. What I found odd about it, sort of along somewhat similar lines, is that how legally are they doing this? Because when I read comics, I read everything, including the indicia, the publisher's notes, and there's nothing in here about the Monkees as intellectual property at all. And this may be nerding on a whole wrong level, but it seems very strange that there's no corporate corporate partnership evident in this. It's just the Archies meet the Monkees, but there's nothing at all about the Monkees themselves or as intellectual property. Mm-hmm. Even if you go down into the very fine print, there's nothing at all about that. And that seems a little strange because, you are using their likenesses, even if they're archified likenesses. The Monkees are still, like you said, 3 of them are still alive. It'd be nice for some sort of acknowledgement of that fact as you go through. We do say that it guest stars the Monkees and stuff like that, but there's nothing at all that tells us that the Monkees had anything, as people or as a conglomerate, had anything to do with this at all, and that just seemed odd to me.
Yeah. I didn't even think about that. And who would you go to, or what corporation would you go to in order to get permission to put out images of the Monkees? I'm assuming you wouldn't go to each individual surviving monkey. Maybe you would. I don't know.
The 2 of them do still tour sometimes, right? And
the 3 of them.
They've done recordings. All 3 of them, yeah. And they do record and things like that also. Mm-hmm. So, the Monkees do exist in some way. And I'm sure there's got to be some official connection here, but it's just odd that there's no acknowledgement of that.
Yeah, I guess so. But, getting back to my in your fandom. We just had to talk about this issue because we're both big monkey fans. And in fact, I saw on, I guess it was Instagram, that you were reading a recent acquisition, I guess, maybe, or something you may have had for a while, a book on the monkeys.
Yeah, these are two recent acquisitions. These are the paperbacks put out in 1966 and 1967. They're media tie-in books. The first one was just called The Monkeys, and it's from Popular Library in 1966, and it's kind of a graphic novel in the same way that Contract with God is a graphic novel because it's a series of short stories. The Monkeys by Gene Fawcett and Howard List from 1966 is basically just a big old graphic novel. I don't think this is adapted from like the Dell Comics. I'm pretty sure this was made just
so it's
for
not
this book.
I thought it was prose, and so it's not prose, it's illustrated narrative?
The first book is pure comics. Except for in the very middle of the book, we get 4 photographic portraits of them. Mm-hmm. But there's like some very short stories, some longer stories, but it's all comics. And then the second one, which came out a year later, called The Monkeys Go Mod. The cover says Monkeys Go Mad, and the A and the ad is crossed. The A and mad is crossed out, and there's an O instead. And this book, are you familiar with Marshall McLuhan's The Medium is the Massage?
Medium is the message, but not massage.
The medium is the massage was this kind of like a printer's design orgy of a book, which is full of photographs and abstract art and collages and things like that. And that's what The Monkeys Go Mod is.
Okay.
And so there are some comic short stories in here by different cartoonists. The cartoons in Monkeys Go Mod are by Richard Hodgins, who I don't know much else about, but there are some cartoons, but there's also prose stories. There are photo collages that look a little like Max Ernst, which Tim, the proprietor of Squeezebox Books, a local bookstore, mentioned to me when I showed it to him. But it's just insane. It's science fiction. It's science fiction. It's like intimate portraits, but also weird, like op art, like laugh-in style Paisleys and things like that. It's just a very, very bizarre little book. So that was a little extra Monkeys tradition that just happened to show up. I got the first book actually just showed up a couple of days ago, so it was perfect timing to read a different Monkeys comic because I got some of this original media tie-in stuff also. Yes, I'm a nerd.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, I'm not familiar with those books that you recently got. Although I'm a big fan and I know quite a bit about Monkeys history. I've read a couple of books, 2 or 3, about the Monkeys, you know, the trajectory of their career. And I find that fascinating, right? Because, you know, one of the bad raps I think that the Monkeys got throughout their, you know, the entire existence, even today, is the fact that they were a prefabricated band. In other words, they were made for television, but they didn't really exist as musicians before. And so that's why they called them the Prefab Four, as opposed to the Beatles, the Fab Four.
Right.
Now, again, for our younger listeners, if you don't know much about the Monkeys, the television series The Monkeys was created primarily as a kind of adaptation or to build on the success of what the Beatles had with both A Hard Day's Night and then later on Help. And in fact, the big difference between A Hard Day's Night and Help, those first 2 Beatles movies, outside of the fact that the first one's in black and white and the second one's in color, is that in Help, the second film, the Beatles apparently all lived together in a location. And that's what you have in the Monkeys television series, right? I mean, here's this band that not only plays together, but these 4 guys live together. And it's about the weird hijinks, the strange adventures that they have, both as musicians and otherwise. Living together and out in the real world. So, I mean, it's a fun television show. If you get the opportunity to watch episodes, if you haven't, then you're really missing out. And so they were based on the success of the Beatles, but they came into their own as their career actually toward the beginning. After that first album, they really wanted more control over what they did as musicians. And that's one of the main reasons why there was this break with Don Kirshner. And arguably Headquarters is the first album, which is their third, where they had, if not complete control, then most of the control. In other words, that's what you could call, again, arguably the first full Monkees recording. And then they had some problems. I still think that the movie Head is one of my favorites. It's one of my favorite musical-based films of all time. I'd put it right up there with A Hard Day's Night. I don't know if you feel the same way.
Actually, I have a horrible confession to make. I have never seen Head.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
oh, my God.
I'm the worst fan in the world.
Well, no, you had those two graphic novels, and so from the 60s. So that makes you, in many ways, kind of a more dedicated fan seeking that stuff out. But no, Head is I think it's a great movie. I used to even teach it when I would teach a graduate course on narrative theory. That would be one of the films that I would use because it definitely does play with storytelling techniques and expectations and in questions, I guess, narrative coherency. And it's about... A lot of people say that it's a film that Bob Rafelson, along with Jack Nicholson, made as a way of destroying the Monkees. I don't know if that's the case or not, but it definitely is a fun watch, so you should check it out. Funny story, and then we'll get back to the comic. When I was in graduate school, because I remember I was living in West Lafayette, Indiana, and I called a local video store. This is when, you had video stores on every other block. I called to ask if they had a movie called Head, and the attendant who answered the phone was female, and she said, sir, we're not that kind of store. And I said, no, I don't mean like a porno film called Head. It's actually a movie about the Monkees. It's directed by Bob Rafelson, who did 5 Easy Pieces. And she said, oh, no, we don't. But getting back to the comic, I think I found this a fun interaction between the Archies and the Monkees. And the premise of this issue number 4, after Archie gets whacked on the head, and apparently what happens afterwards with the Monkees is inside of his head, right? As he's unconscious. Within this world, what gets things going is that Davy Jones is kidnapped, which it's kind of a premise that you would find on a lot of Monkees television episodes.
Right,
something happens to
like
one
a
of them.
Episode.
Yeah, it does. And I like the way, for the most part, that the Monkees are represented, both visually and also in terms of story behavior. Although I wish Mike had been a little more cynical or jaded or just different from the others, because that's one of the things about the Monkees I appreciated. He definitely did stand out from the other Monkees, and not just because of the toboggan he wore.
Yeah, he did seem a little too peppy and upbeat,
too bubblegummy.
Yeah, even for the Monkees. Yeah. But I like how they do the quick visual style transitions, and things just happen for there's no narrative reason why suddenly they're wearing superhero costumes, but they are, because that's just the thing that happens.
Exactly, and it would happen in Monkees episodes, yeah.
Exactly, and then when the Archies get their superhero costumes, of course, Archie is pure heart and things like that. So there's callbacks to Archie history as well.
Exactly, yeah. I'm glad that you pointed that out. Another thing that I really appreciated, and this is around, we don't have page numbers, I don't know, maybe it's around 16 or 17. It's page 18 in the PDF that we're reading from. The Monkees and the Archies go to a place called the Volcano, which is actually a volcano. It's located at a volcano, which tells you something about the fantasy world where all of this is taking place. And there's like a battle of the bands going on. And the forces behind Davy's kidnap is about to play a new song called Sugar Sugar. And at this point, when they announced the song Sugar Sugar, the Peter Tork character turns to the Michael Nesmith character and says, "Sugar, sugar, this sounds familiar. Did we pass on this song?" And then Mike responds, "That's an urban myth." And I don't know if it's an urban myth, though, but I can tell you, I have heard many times that Sugar, Sugar had been given to the Monkees as an option, but they passed on it. But maybe that is an urban myth, and maybe what I'd been reading and hearing about for years has no basis in reality. But there is some kind of link, urban myth or otherwise, between what eventually became the big hit for the Archies, Sugar Sugar, and the Monkees.
Yeah, and the singer for Sugar Sugar, because again the Archies, they're it's like the Monkees were a made up band visually. The Archies were a made up band sonically, and the singer of that song was Ron Dante. I don't know if you know anything about Ron Dante.
Yeah, I think he was on a recent episode of Gilbert Gottfried's Amazing Colossal podcast.
Yes, he was. Yeah, he also did the music for not the Spider-Man rock opera record that everybody knows, Rock Reflections of a Superhero. He did the one before that with the best Spider-Man theme song of all time. It's even better than the cartoon show because it makes no sense. It makes no sense. He's a wall-crawling sex machine. He makes all the little girls sigh. Those are lyrics from the Spider-Man theme song. Move like a spider, groove like a man. Everybody's talking about that Marvel Spider-Man.
Yeah, quite a bit different from Sugar, oh honey, honey, you're my candy girl, and you got me wanting you.
Exactly. And again, he did that, and he did a lot of studio work, and I just pulled up Wikipedia just because I wanted to double check something. Turns out that at the same time Sugar Sugar was on the top of the charts, also the song Tracy by the Cufflinks was on the charts.
That's right, yeah.
And Tracy was sung by Ron Dante.
Tracy, da 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 da.
Yep. So
I don't know the lyrics, but
so he had two top 10 hits at the same time, and nobody knew his name.
Yeah. And in fact, that's one of the things that they really hammered home on that interview on Gilbert Gottfried's Amazing Colossal podcast.
Yeah, and he produced like the first 8 Barry Manilow records. He was he did everything.
Yeah. And I'm wondering if there's any link between Dante and this figure who has stolen the Archies' Sugar Sugar. You know, this guy who has a mustache whose henchmen are apes.
Yeah, Tony Toons.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't seem... I don't know what Ron Dante looks like, but it doesn't... I don't think this is supposed to be him, but it's hard to know because there are some deep references as you go through here. So they're clearly having the creators clearly, I think, had a lot of fun when they were doing this.
Yeah. And this is a fun issue. I have to admit, I haven't been keeping up with the world of Archie, either the older or even the newer incarnations of Archie. But what I've read, I like. For instance, Mark Waid's Archie, this stuff I enjoyed. The Jughead, and of course the horror titles, Afterlife with Archie, whenever we get an issue. And then the Sabrina, yeah. But this is fun.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And one thing I wish I would have known before I got to the end of the book is that there's actually, they put out a Spotify playlist for this issue also. So if you go to Spotify and search for the playlist, The Archies 4, it's like 10 songs, and it's a pretty good thing. It's all trying to be like kind of garagey power poppy stuff. There's one Monkees track.
Mm-hmm. I Want to Be Free.
Right, but there's also the Smithereens, the Cars, Nick Lowe, Cheap Trick, the Buzzcocks kind of came out of nowhere for me. The Rolling Stones,
and don't forget Elvis Costello.
And Elvis Costello. Oh yeah, Veronica. Yeah, one of my absolute favorites. So it's a fun playlist to listen along to as well. And since I'm guessing there'll be a lot of newer younger readers, like you said, there's a few bands there that I don't actually know, but I liked a lot. Night Riots and the Madcaps. Those were both fun songs also by those two bands. So that was the kids will get a little music history as they go through. It's kind of sad that Sugar Sugar is not in this.
Yeah.
But, hey, what can you do?
Yeah. And, I didn't go and listen to this playlist on Spotify, even though I have a Spotify account. But one of the things I appreciated about this playlist is I recognized most of the songs or acts. like the Smithereens, Cheap Trick of course, Elvis Costello, Nick Lowe and the Cars, and the Rolling Stones, of course, and Buzzcocks, because many times at the back of an issue of a comic, they will include playlists, and many times it would be, what I'm listening to as I wrote this or as I illustrated it. And 9 times out of 10 on that list, I will not recognize anything because I'm so out of touch with contemporary music. This I recognized, for the most part. Yeah, but, nothing wrong with that. But hey, we know some of the granular detail about the history of the Monkees that many younger people don't.
Yeah, and so we can attest the fact that this actually does feel like a Monkees episode. It feels true to what they're trying to do. So I appreciated that a lot.
Mm-hmm. Gene, 3 really good titles we looked at this week. We started off with Red Winter, which is by Anneli Furmark, our introduction to this apparently very important Swedish creator. After that, we looked at Spurrier and Rachel Stott's Motherlands #1. And then we wrapped up with the Archies #4, written by Alex Segura and Matthew Rosenberg, with art by Joe Eisma.
Yeah, it was another wide-ranging. These 3 books couldn't be more different, sort of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but yeah, each is appealing in its own way and for different reasons.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes,
this was fun.
And if you want to find fun comics like this, then you would do well to check out the website of our sponsor, which is Discount Comic Book Service. Remember, go to dcbservice.com, and every single month you're going to find some incredible specials, bundled collections, and single issues as well. That's dcbservice.com. And after you do get your comics there, get in touch with us and let us know what you thought about our episode. If you go to our website, comicsalternative.com, you'll find that you can leave us a voice message online via SpeakPipe.
Just like Emil Ferris. Be just like Emil Ferris.
That's right. Be like Emil and leave us a message via SpeakPipe. Or you can call us the old-fashioned way. Our phone number is 415-3-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
Or you can reach us via email, that relic from the 1990s. We're 2 guys at comicsalternative.com. Or you can reach me, Gene, at comicsalternative.com. And Derek?
At Derek at comicsalternative.com. And you can find us all over social media. We have accounts on Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Goodreads, Pinterest, YouTube, and we have a Slack account. So definitely join us on there. You can subscribe to the podcast through Apple Podcasts. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can also find us on TuneIn, the aforementioned Spotify, on iHeartRadio, and on Google Play Music. But you can find every single one of our podcast episodes, as well as the reviews and comics-related commentary that we post on our blog, simply by going to our website, comicsalternative.com.
All your internets belong to us.
That's right. And, Gene, I've really enjoyed talking with you about comics over the past 3 weeks, and I hope you and I can do more co-hosting together in the weeks to come.
Yeah, I hope so too. Yeah, it's been fun to get back on the horse a little bit.
Yeah,
even in the midst of flu and confusion.
Well, you sound a lot better than you have the past couple of weeks, so that's good.
I'm pretty much as normal as I think I'm ever going to be. So,
we'll get completely well, my friend. And until later, I'm Derek,
and I'm Gene.
Take care.
See you later.
happened?